So apparently, Gen Z and younger generations, their aspirational goal in life is to become landlords. There is like this trend online where they are saying that they want to own like 5 to 10 apartments and then make money out of it and never work. And for me, this is very shocking, but I don't know, guys, if this was your dream when you were kids.
Yes, absolutely. Aodhán, was it your dream?
Really? Where did this report come from?
I mean, this is this social media trend where
Brilliant.
in TikTok and things like that.
Well, we need to protect that dream, you know, at all costs. We need to protect the rights of people to own property and, make money out of it as much as they possibly can, because that will make us all happier in the end.
So we're done. Thanks for listening.
This is the end of the program. But I mean, sorry.
No, go please. I just want to say that seeing houses as a way for some to get rich is part of what got us here to the housing crisis. If I could land it and bring some order to this. So Aodhán Ó Ríordáin is a Labour MEP from Dublin. He's the lead S&D negotiator on housing. I'm Alex White.
And I'm Irene de la Puerta.
And today we're asking, can the EU lower your rent? This is Take a Left, the podcast from the Socialists and Democrats group in the European Parliament.
Il Presidente!
Ma cos'è la sinistra?
The resolution is adopted.
So, along with access to healthcare and security policy, housing is among the top 3 things that people believe that governments should be working on. That's according to a survey that we recently commissioned. And we are working on it. President von der Leyen is due to present the EU's affordable housing plan.
On the 16th of December, so pretty soon.
Pretty soon indeed. Aodhán, housing has never really been on the EU agenda until recently. What did it take to get us here?
The S&D, I'll be frank about it. It was our main negotiating platform when we went into negotiations for the election of the Commission President, the election of the Commission. We wanted a housing commissioner, which we achieved, in Dan Jurgensen, and we wanted a housing committee, which we achieved. So only for the S&D, this wouldn't be happening. Now, lots of people in member states will ask, what on earth does the European institutions have when it comes to housing? What confidence do they have? But it was a major part of the European campaign, election campaigns last year, 18 months ago. And so, basically, the state aid rules are something that inhibits local authorities' ability to be involved in the housing market. So there was a case in the Netherlands where a vulture fund took a local authority to court because they felt that they were interfering with the state aid rules. So that's already effectively been conceded by the Commission that the state aid rules need to be changed. Mm-hmm. In Ireland, for example, all of the local authorities in Ireland, and there's 31 of them, their borrowing capacity is only 118 million. Only 118 million. Why? Because they have constraints put on them by the Irish financial institutions, which in turn have constraints put on them by the European financial institutions. So if we change the state aid rules, local authorities can be more involved in the housing market. And local authorities don't have a profit motive. And then when it comes to tenant rights, consumer rights are a European competency. If you're a tenant, you're effectively a consumer of a product, which is housing. It's a kind of a right-wing way of looking at the world, but it's how
that's the thing.
It's working in effect.
So it's a commodity.
Yeah. So if we were to give more rights to tenants and to end child evictions, for example, well, then we're going to have less homelessness. We have to tilt the balance. And we also need a kind of a fighting fund. So we're talking about 300 billion. Yeah. That individual member states could tap into for housing first solutions, or for financing approved housing bodies, just to ramp up the delivery of housing. And in all of these things, I think it'll also help the average European citizen to look at the European project and go, okay, they are on my side. Yeah. I've been told by the far right that they're the worst thing ever. Yeah. That they're trying to take away my sovereignty. That they're they're bringing all these really unnecessary regulations, and it's all crazy stuff, and we need to be anti-European. But if the European institutions are seen to drive forward solutions on the most basic provision, which is housing, well then I think that'll be a very positive thing as well.
Now that you mentioned this, European project and the feeling that the citizens may have about it, I wanted to bring to the table a debate and a feeling. I think that now young generations, like we were talking about Gen Z and Alphas, but also millennials, like us, for instance.
Am I not one of them?
I don't think so.
What do I get? What's a 49-year-old now?
What's the line?
What's a 49? Am I a boomer? No.
No, I think boomer is baby boomer.
There is like X generation or something like this, right?
No, that's
I was born in the 70s, like, you know, so most of my generation, their middle name is Moonbeam.
Okay.
Except I was born in Ireland. So most of us are called John Paul. But anyway.
Yeah. But I don't know. But like, you're not quite the generation to have just been able to buy a house. I mean, maybe tell me if you were, buy a house just for nothing on like your basic salary and then just to be ridiculously rich later on.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like the stresses. I mean, the current generation who are, I don't know, in their mid-20s have been through so much. They saw a financial crash 15 years ago when they were children, and they possibly saw their parents losing their jobs, massive insecurity. A lot of it was housing based.
Yeah,
you know, and so they got through that. And then we've had the pandemic, which was hugely influential in a negative way in people's lives. You know, they're all trying to struggle with the arrival of social media and how they interact with each other, and now they can't leave home and form relationships maybe like their older siblings did, or their uncles and aunties did, or their parents did, and they're wondering where are these solutions coming from? Why, you know, and they're being told
this is backed up. Like it's 80%, so 76% agree that it's harder to rent or buy than parents. So it's like backed up by the data.
And it's this classic, you know, do I move out and have my own independence and maybe, you know, form a relationship or be a young person? Okay, but I won't be able to save for a deposit if I do that, because a disproportionate amount of my income is going to go into rent. Or do I stay at home and maybe try and save as much as I possibly can to get on the property ladder? But in the meantime, I'm stuck, and you can't grow as a person in, you know, at that stage at home. And it feels as if, though, whenever a policymaker or a politician appears on the media, they are taking the interests of the property owner, the landlord, the investor much more seriously than the rights of the individual young person. And that's what's really debilitating. And of course, then the struggle for us is that they're going to listen to people who say, well, you know something, it's all about immigration. That's the real reason. Or it's all, you know, there's a whole load of people that you can blame. And to build on that resentment and to build on that hurt and build on the humiliation of living at home.
And it's exactly there when, as you mentioned it before, then the far right takes advantage of all of this frustration, and then they just create this kind of like fake enemies, right? Like the migration or whatever, instead of actually
trans people or something. They're the reason why you're stuck at home. And the idea is not to find a solution to your housing problem. Like the easiest thing for us to do, and certainly for me to do in my own country where we're not in government, is to be against everything, is to throw our hands up and not work with the system and not work and try and find solutions. But I think it is the responsibility of, you know, political groupings like the S&D to find solutions. It's not good enough for us just to, you know, to criticise, to attack von der Leyen, or to attack, you know, of course we want to attack the far right. Of course we're going to expose them, but that's not enough. We expose them by being better than them, and by, you know, showing solutions and by driving forward policies that come to fruition, and then, you know, get people housed, which is the point.
Well, I think, and also just to step back on a sort of philosophical thing, like you're talking about young people, there's this idea that, well, there's a Financial Times report that young people are increasingly slipping into sort of nihilism, where they realise that even if they work hard, they won't get a good home and things like that.
No, and they don't think they're going to have. I mean, the always assumption was you're going to be better off than your parents. Yeah, right. That was the assumption. That's been the guiding assumption all the way through maybe generations, is that, you know, you're going to have a better life than your parents, or maybe earn more than your parents, or have more opportunities than your parents, you'll travel more.
Education, better jobs.
And that's what your parents want. Your parents want you to have a better life than they had. And that's and allied with that, because I think what happens in all these conversations, that until housing hits the middle classes, then politicians don't care. But there's always been a housing crisis on a level. And homelessness is something that I'm proud that the S&D have taken to the heart of this discussion, because for other groupings here and in domestic politics, it's when a middle class, you know, mid-20-year-old can't find accommodation for themselves, that's when housing becomes an issue. But to be honest, if you have 1 million homeless people across the European Union, which we do, if in my own country we have 5,000 homeless children, that has to be at the heart of our deliberations, because it's far too easy to slip into what is affecting the middle class person is the most important thing. But it's if you're a child who's 13, 14 years of age, if you're living in homelessness, you don't have the access to the platform to talk about your experience as maybe the middle class 26-year-old has, right?
Yeah.
But the level of humiliation that child feels is unbounded. So you're moving from place to place. You're moving from hotel to hotel. You don't know necessarily if you're going to be here for Christmas. You don't take clothes out of a bag because why would you? You don't bring friends over. People talk about homework. Where do you do your homework? Yeah. And if you have that level of sort of insecurity about where you live, you also have a level of insecurity as to what school you might be going to. Because you may be, in 3 months' time or 6 months' time, you may be living on your side of the city because it's the only available. And are you going to travel? Is your parents going to? So you move from school to school. And that lasts a lifetime. Now, I'm not trying to sort of pitch one against the other. If you're 26 and you're at home, it's pretty humiliating. You want to start a life for yourself. But if you're 13, you're moving around the place, and society is telling you it's your parents' fault, right? Yeah. But you're living in homeless accommodation or emergency accommodation. The level of humiliation with that and insecurity can last a lifetime. Does often last a lifetime. So it is. I mean, we have these. The European Union would say we're going to end homelessness by 2030, and that sounds ambitious and wonderful, but in a few weeks' time, it's going to be 2026. Are we anywhere nearer that goal, or are we anywhere nearer being serious about that goal? So I think what we're trying to do in our deliberations is to actually, go through the root causes of homelessness and eliminate them, because it's the empowerment of that child. It really has to be at the heart of what our politics is, because I don't hear that from other groups. I don't hear it from the EPP who... Whenever we have a discussion, and we had one there last week, where they go, well, I don't hear anything about the property rights mentioned in this document that you've just brought forward. It's like, well, you know something? I didn't realise that anybody anywhere was attacking the right to own property, but I'm not hearing enough of the right of the child in this circumstance. Look, I used to teach in an area of disadvantage. I know what it's like to be interacting with a child who has that insecurity at the core of their existence. It's pretty debilitating. Yeah. So that has to be at the heart of our approach.
Overwhelmingly, people feel that houses should not be an object of speculation, but should be a fundamental right. Yeah. So we found that out. But most Europeans.
But trying to get this stitched into any of our reports is difficult, because they want to counterbalance with the right to property, which nobody is attacking. I don't believe. But but what's frustrating is, apart from people knocking the microphone, what's frustrating is that what caused this issue is just the unfettered right-wing view of the world. It's this market-driven approach which has caused the problem. The crash, 15 years ago was caused by right-wing ideology. This has been caused by right-wing ideology. When you don't regulate, when you don't intervene, and when you let developers or landlords do whatever the hell they want. Exactly. And now we are scrambling for solutions, and the solutions are coming from the EPP. Is like, do you know something more of it? We just need maybe more of that. Yeah. And then there's under this guise of, the one thing, you always have to admire them, the right, because they come up with phrases which sound so cuddly, right, for really, really nasty stuff, like free speech. Yeah. That's so lovely. Lovely. Free speech sounds great, except it means that somebody can be as obnoxious and incite whatever the hell they want at any time of the day or night, right, and to punch down. And then they have simplification. Oh, simplification, that sounds nice.
It does sound good.
Doesn't it? It means making things simple. No, it actually means ripping away all those protections that have been hard fought for over generations to protect consumers, to protect workers, to protect the environment.
Many would have us believe that's the problem, though, right? That we don't have enough space to build those. We need to build more houses.
If we just let those people who want to make money do whatever they like and not have to worry about silly old rules, everything will be fantastic. Yeah. But the very thing that caused the crash 15 years ago was lack of regulation. Yeah. Right? Letting people who have a profit motive, rip up the rule book and do what they like. And that's exactly what they want us to return to. And it's not going to work. But they are hoping that people think, leaning into this sort of anti-European sentiment of, all they do there is make our lives more difficult. And why is that? The European Union is so annoying. But no entity has done more for workers' rights in my country than the European Union.
Another point that we would like to talk about is very related with actually what you are saying, is the fact that regarding speculation, the fact that people are treating houses as if it will be gold or crypto, right? We are not talking about one person that owns one apartment and is renting it to whatever family for long, but people that actually they maybe own a full building, or actually companies that are buying full blocks of apartments. And then, they play with this speculation to make the prices skyrocketing from one day to the other. What do you think, do you think actually the EU should be strict about this and regulate this situation?
Absolutely, because what's the end goal? I mean, this is about people's lives. Fundamentally, at the heart of our politics has to be making the individual life of the citizen better.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know what's at the centre of the EPP philosophy when they are making their arguments, because it isn't the individual in housing need. It may be the person who owns the housing or wants to make money off it. And that's fundamentally where we're at. So when we're trying to do this, to regulate the financialisation, the vulture funds, those who are really disproportionately warping the market, if you were. We want to regulate that in order to facilitate that somebody who is earning a wage can live off that wage in the place where they're from or where their children go to school. That's the energy and that's the engine behind what we're trying to achieve. It's that's the ideology. I trust and I believe that our argument is going to win through, because it just has to.
Another data that we found in this survey very interesting is that 65% believe that actually the more properties a person owns, the more tax they should pay.
Amen. We have come to this situation now of deep unhappiness. We have created a scenario where there is deep unhappiness, right? And if you have housing insecurity, it goes into everything in your life. Everything. Because if you go to bed at night and look at the ceiling and look at the walls, and that's what's making you unhappy, it is fundamental to how you approach your life. It makes you less able to do your job well, less able to interact with your family better, less able to be a good parent, less able to be a good spouse or whatever. It just creates a huge amount of unhappiness, and that level of unhappiness is unsustainable. It's unsustainable. So. I think sometimes we talk about statistics, and we talk about financialisation, and we talk about simplification, and we talk about regulation. But really, what we're talking here about is about security and happiness. It's as fundamental as that.
And talking about fundamentally, it's affordability. There's a lot of issues in the housing crisis, but it is about affording a home. And as you said, there has always been to some extent a housing crisis, and it's not like there is a sort of wonderful nostalgic past we can look back to, but it is increasingly difficult to get an affordable home.
There was a time when a family on one salary could afford a home.
Yeah, Homer Simpson, he just lives in a detached house.
Right.
He has
lives in the nuclear power, or works in the nuclear power plant.
Exactly.
You want to go back to that?
Yeah, he doesn't have a college degree.
To the good old times.
But you wouldn't make that show now, would you? You could be. I mean, I feel like you're mocking me, but when they created that, it made sense.
Well, that was the life I grew up with. That most of the people, my peers, grew up with. It was like a.
As a teacher, you could afford a house.
Yeah, now 2 teachers can't afford a house.
The thing is, here we have this weird paradox. So at the same time that we have people really struggling because, as you are saying, they cannot afford a home, no matter how much they save, no matter what a nice job they have, they will never be able to buy an apartment. I'm not even saying a luxury one, a really standard, nice one. They will never be able to do that. And at the same time, you have these people or companies getting this passive income, and they are not making any effort and just getting richer and richer. To prepare this program, we were also discussing, and it was very interesting because we realized that sometimes there are landlords that they may have 5 apartments in the same block, right? They just buy them, and then in this area, they build a new park or a new public school, or they open a new metro station, and then immediately the value of those apartments, increase. But all of this is thanks to the public investment.
Yeah.
So the paradox of having a lot of people struggling because they cannot even afford their rent, and then at the same time people taking advantage of the public investment because they just own a full building. Isn't it crazy? What can we do to really stop this?
We want the local authorities to be driving this. We want the local authorities to be the setting the agenda. That's what used to happen. Well, certainly in Ireland, like 100 years ago, the biggest developer was the local authorities. They were the ones who were building communities. And I live in a place called Marino, which is the original council estate of the Free State of independent Ireland, and that was the vision, was that community spaces, open areas, green spaces, the shops, the schools, the transport links, right? That's
nice.
We're building a community, right? Okay, now you have a developer who's only worried about that. It's about how many units can I put in, and unless you browbeat through legislation or through regulation or through planning law that they have to have a creche or they have to have a playground or they have to have transport links, then it's not going to happen. And often they do the absolute minimum, but the council is different. So I think what we want to get back to is the thing that worked, and the standard of housing can often vary. In my country, I'm told that 80% of the apartments that were built from 1996 to 2014 are defective. Some of them are a little bit defective. Some of them are, very defective and can't be resolved. But that's what happens. And of course, you trace the developer who has constructed these units, and the developer has changed the company name, so they're not liable anymore. Yeah. That doesn't happen in a local authority.
No.
All right, they don't build things that are defective. If there's a problem with them, you have recourse to dealing with them. They don't have a profit motive. All of their energies is to building communities, because they're going to have to actually take ownership and take charge of those communities long term. And that's the difference. It's the motivation behind those who are constructing the units. So if we get, I know it sounds very big state for some years, but it worked. And when we had problems in every member state back in the day, maybe every member state is different, and there's a balance to be struck between council housing and private housing. But at the same time, what we didn't have was the level of homelessness and the level of people in housing need and the level of people in unhappiness.
And what can the EU do about that? Like von der Leyen will be presenting, or as President von der Leyen will be presenting
fundamentally, the state aid rules are something that has to shift. But if the state aid rules are loosened, it means, and I understand the state aid rules that came in when so many member states were, financially exposed because of the housing collapse and the banking collapse of the mid 2000s. So state aid rules change. All right, and that means the local authorities can get more involved. We have a fighting fund we've suggested 300 billion, which could be utilised for housing first initiatives and approved housing bodies, which are not councils, but effectively it's the same because they don't have a profit motive. And then you have the tenant rights, which are enhanced as well, which also means that if somebody has housing, that they can't be evicted, particularly if they're children. And all these things will add to the ability of somebody to obtain housing, but if they're in housing, to maintain that housing. And there'll be an argument over money, there always is, but I can't think of anything else worth spending money on than the housing of European citizens. But what we have here, as you said earlier, is that we have a potential here for politicians of different colour to come together and to find a common cause and common solution. And that's what's so exciting about this, because it's actually not the politics that people are led to believe is the norm. People shouting at each other, making speeches, catching people out, getting one-liners, embarrassing people, humiliating your political opposition. That's actually not the real point of politics. The point of politics is to reach a compromise that's workable to benefit people's lives and to enhance happiness. That's the point.
And the happiness, sorry, go on.
Do you think, now we are
does that sound a bit kind of, I don't know, Christmassy sort of,
happiness?
Am I talking about happiness too much?
It's the conclusion. I prepared a conclusion about pessimism. I was going to say we're pessimistic, but you're just saying we're sad, so that's worse. Thinking about Ursula von der Leyen, if you were talking about bringing us there, if you're suddenly charged with writing her speech when she presents the EU's affordable housing plan next week through some weird clerical error, what should she say? What
I want her to say is all those things that we've said, is that homelessness is a priority, that unhappiness caused by housing need is a priority, that we are fronting up with money, that housing is a right as much as property is a right, that the person at risk of eviction is more important than the landlord at risk of losing a few bob. Bob meaning money, by the way. Sorry, I have to make sure people understand that. And that we can change things so that the state aid rules change, the tenant rights will be enhanced, that we have a fighting fund of 300 billion or so, and that short-term lets just have to be regulated. They are things within our gift. If we don't do it, and this housing crisis is going to get deeper and deeper and deeper. At the time of the next European elections, all the statistics, which are horrendous at the moment, are going to be twice as bad. And then they look to politicians like us and say, what did you do?
Yeah. Well, I think, we're pretty confident that the Commission President listens to the S&D podcast, so hopefully...
Well, she should.
Hopefully.
She should. But look, I mean, what do we have? We have a committee that's working and doing our best. Thanks to us. We have a commissioner for housing who's launching his report on the 16th of December. Thanks to us. We have a president of the European Commission who has mentioned housing in her speech on numerous occasions. Thanks to us. And we have a report, hopefully it's going to be passed by plenary in March, April. Thanks to us. So, and then it's about delivery. And at the end of the day, you would hope that somebody in housing need across the European Union would say, well, after all the talk, my local authority is now in a position to provide housing for me, or my tenant rights have now been enhanced, or all these short-term lets which are around the place, around where I live, they're now more curtailed. So there's more housing stock for me and my family. These are things that are deliverable.
Yeah, maybe like in the future, someone will be able to say, actually, the EU was able to lower my rent,
Yeah, and when Ireland has the presidency of the European Council from July next year, we can actually see these things being rolled out. And I'll be able to say it took an Irish member of the S&D to make it all
happen. That was
happen.
a straw that comes back. Excellent, cool. Well, let's wrap it up with that moment of optimism.
Well, we need it. We need it. Yeah. We don't deal in fear, and we don't deal in hate. Others do, but it's destructive, and it doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Aodhán. Really, I think it was a very
very
nice chat. Yeah.
And thanks.
We had a half an hour beforehand getting my name right, by the way.
That's not true. We had it right the whole time.
Though, from this guy.
Thank you very much to Aodhán Ó Ríordáin.
Well done.
Thanks for listening to the SD podcast.